Hi, I'm not Ryan Szymanski of the Battleship New Jersey Memorial and Museum. I am in fact Drakinifel, and although my office has sometimes been likened to a museum, I'm rather hoping it doesn't become a memorial anytime soon. Now, what on earth am I doing standing in front of Turret 1 on USS New Jersey? Well, why not, for one thing, but for another thing, what I'm here to do today is to examine some of the scenes from the famous Battleship movie, Battleship. You know, the one off Hawaii with the aliens and that lot, starring, among other things, the battleship USS Missouri. Now, you might think, well, yes, it's a... Now, you might think, yeah, okay, Drac, but, you know, it is a popcorn flick after all. And yes, it is a popcorn movie. It's a very fun popcorn movie. It's a very entertaining popcorn movie. I've watched it several times myself. And of course, yeah, you're not supposed to take it 100% seriously. But some of the scenes aboard the Battleship Missouri involve things like transferring shells from the aft magazine forward, making sure that the ship can actually move by lighting off the boilers, and various other things. And I just wanted to see, well, you know, how close to reality were some of those scenes? In terms of, is it physically possible? Do these routes even exist? And so on and so forth. So, of course, while I'm here, having just come up from Baltimore's STEAM school aboard the SS John W. Brown Liberty ship down there, I thought I'd take a few hours to dive through various parts of the ship and, well, answer those questions for you. So, we're definitely going to see, is it possible to move a shell from Turret 3's shell room to the one in Turret 2? We're definitely going to see, is it possible to actually light off the ship from starting up the boilers in the kind of time and speed that they actually do it. And we might take a look at one or two of the other famous scenes as well, depending on what we've got time for and if we can find the keys. So, let's go exploring. Right, so we're here at the base of Turret 3's barbette. Going up there is one of the only ways you can actually access where the shells would be stored. Down here is some of the powder magazines, or more specifically, because we're in the base of the barbette, you can see the turntable here. Here are the scuttles where the powder magazines would feed powder through to the powder hoists to go further up into the ship. So, because this area, as you can see, has not yet been fully restored and the rest of the interior of the barbette doesn't have any lighting, we're going to explore how you get down to this level in one of the more lit up turret areas up front. But I'm now going to show you, if you somehow manage to persuade a shell to get down here, how you would then have to get it to Broadway. So, assuming that, as I said, you've got the shell somewhere down into this base of the ship, we are now on deck 5. You can tell that because if you look at these markers, you can see these codes which tell you roughly where you are. So this 5 means we're on deck 5, and this helps give you other specific location clues. So you'd have to come through there, through this doorway. You can see we're now 5156, and as you can see, hopefully the light level's pretty low, but I need both hands. We do have these yellow rails, which you'll see perhaps more clearly when we get to turret 2, and these are to allow you to move heavy objects like shells via chain falls, but you'll notice there isn't one in there to that hatchway. But in any case, we then step out through here, don't fall down the hatch, and then we have a vertical ladder which brings us through this hatch and I mean, if I can fit through it, technically speaking a 16-inch shell can as well, you'll see, and then onto this platform. You can see from the curve there we're now outside the barbette on deck 4. Then up here, and unlock that, grab that, re-secure, and we're now on deck 3. So you can see we're now on the right, we're on the outside of turret 3's barbette through this hatch, and looking back again you can see we have more of this rail system, and there is a small electrical hoist, so potentially you wouldn't have to climb that with a shell. You could use that to hoist the shell up if you could get it to that point in the first place. And as you can see, we're in a little bit of a damage control area. There's an electrical transformer buzzing. But why have we come all the way up to deck 3? Well, we follow our rail system, and you can see here, welcome to Broadway. So here's the view of my head at 6 foot. So you're not going to be walking straight through this. You're going to have to duck or hunch. And we're now in Broadway itself. As you can see, the rail system continues. Obviously it has breaks where there are bulkhead doors, but there are sections that you can join it all together. So in theory, you could move a shell back and forth if you had gotten it using the hoist and the rails all the way along Broadway, because as anyone knows, carrying heavy objects and then having to step over things like hatch combings, yeah, not so fun. So come out into the general public area, and you can see this is exactly how it would be done. They've actually mocked it up here with a shell, little powered hoist, so you could just walk it along. And again, as you can see here, they've included the split section. Make sure I haven't bashed myself too badly. There we go. And again, as you can see, they've included all along Broadway these sections in place. But you can see here's the join, and there's a join there, and these would be removed if the ship was in action. But obviously when the ship's prepping for action, that's not the case. So leaving aside our clue as to how you'd actually do it, you come forward and over. You can see we've got all this damage control equipment, monitoring equipment, access to the ship's engine rooms, which we will, as you can see in there, which we'll come back to in a minute. More damage control equipment. Here's a fully lit, static, sorry. Here's a fully lit ship's engine room. There's the boilers there, so. But, continuing down Broadway, some 5-inch shells. Still going. Steering position, and then we follow our helpful line of guide rail, and at last we end up here in turret 2, and as you can see, this was not here originally. This has been cut through the barbette to give access to turret 2. There's the section one that was cut off, which actually is quite useful because you actually get a good look at the interior. So lower armor section, welds, bolts, rivets, and the bit that spins inside. So that's brought us to turret 2 shell room, or one of the shell levels. There's one of our lightweight shells. That's another one. And this is where, ideally, you would need to have your shells so that you could fire them at your alien enemies, because here's a shell hoist, and there's a shell being power buckled in. Now, of course, turret 2 is elevated one level compared to turret 3 and turret 1. Obviously we've seen turret 3. Here's a wonderful 3D printed shell, just in case you're interested. So you can see the size of the burster charge, it's got a windscreen and everything. But if we continue on down, again, there's where an original hatch would be. We get down to this level. So here's additional shell storage, although obviously the shell hoists are one level above us. So that's the level you'd need access to. That's the hatch you'd need to get through. You can see there's another hatch straight down there. So let's have a little check, double back. And yes, you can see there is actually a chain fall and an electric hoist. So you could drop chains through here down to the powder level, which as you can see is much bigger, much more cleaned up than the one in turret 3. And over there, just next to where the red hat is, you can see kind of the mirror image of the hatchway or doorway, depending on how nautical you are, that we came through in turret 3 in order to get out of there and make our way here. So you can see that there's the track. Remember we stood on that, and in here you have this cathedral-like feel because, as I said, turret 2 is one level higher. So whereas in turret 3 the base of the actual rotation, whereas in turret 3 the base of the shell room, the main shell room that is, was directly above our heads. Here we have a 2-deck level difference. So in turret 3 we were down there, we came up to there, and then we had access, as you can see here, they also have access with these ladders going up through to the top there. So let's go back up, because then you'd be inside the main portion of the turret. So if we work in reverse order, if indeed you are mad enough to try and move one of these shells by hand, quite apart from the fact that they weigh 2,700 pounds and it's just not physically possible to get 2 people to move them around, how difficult would it actually be? Could you do it? In theory, if the ship's power systems were running, actually yes. Not in the way they depict it, but you would have to take one of these shells, which we will do now. You'd bring it over to here with your power buckling. You'd open your hatch. You'd get your chain fall hoist. You'd get your hook, and then you would hook on to the shells. Obviously, these being replicas, they don't have the pad eyes on them that you would actually use to manipulate them around. You'd have to drop it down 2 levels, or in this case, 1 level perhaps in the case of turret 3. Then you'd have to hook up a way of getting it out and over that hatch, and then you'd have to hook it up to those yellow rails, putting all the various sections in, maneuvering it to that other set of hatchways that we went up, where there's the other chain fall hoist to hook up to Broadway. So we've got our lightweight shell. So just to, I know we're kind of belaboring the point, but just to kind of prove the issue, this is a shell obviously that I can actually carry, and well, here's our first issue with carrying it. So there's our one part of our rail system, which is what we would actually be hooking it up to, one in this area. Obviously, as I said, that hatchway doesn't really exist. But first problem, the Mark 8 is too big to feed through these hatches. So you would have to do it if you had superhuman strength, and you were going to maneuver this. You would be carrying it facing forward. So I guess that is a small portion of realism. So we're essentially doing this in reverse. Now we could be generous and assume that Missouri's preservation staff have cut hatches in both turret 3 and turret 2's barbettes, whereas obviously on New Jersey there's just in turret 2. So we could assume that they've done that, in which case traversing would just be a case of coming down that section we've come through. Obviously we're doing this whole trip in reverse, But coming through that section and then just maneuvering it down Broadway. But as you can see with me doing it with this lightweight fiberglass edition, it is not the easiest of things. So as we keep going, we're a good chunk of the way through. This is, incidentally, apart from the lack of Adeptus Astartes grade strength amongst US Navy sailors, this is one of the big reasons why you have this hoist and transfer system, which, as you can see, we're arriving at. So, I'm not going to take it that last stretch because I'm going to have to unhook all the ropes and everything, but yeah, you can kind of see the awkwardness of the whole situation. So, if Missouri's crew had put a hole in the side of turret 3's barbette and a hole in the side of turret 2's barbette, as we saw, then in theory it's, relatively speaking, a simple process to transport one of these shells from one magazine to the other. But in order to do that, because that hole, obviously, as we said, was never supposed to be there, you won't have this rail system to get it out of the turret. So you would have, or out of the barbette. So you'd have to improvise some way of getting it over that line, which I suppose technically you might be able to do with chain falls and a dolly of some kind. But then you would absolutely have to hook it up to this wonderful thing and cart it forward along with that. And if one or both turrets are actually still in full working order without those holes cut in the side of them, you would have to lower it down through those hatches, through those chain falls like we saw in turret 2. You'd then have to maneuver it through the hatches as we saw at the base of turret 3, and then you'd have to come up using the chain falls to that area just to the right of where you can see there at the end of Broadway around turret 3. And then if I actually do the shoulder carry thing, this is the other fun thing. If I actually do the shoulder carry that they were doing at 6 feet, as you can probably hear, I'm bashing the tail end of the shell into this rail system anyway, and that's with me standing here just in the main part. If I go through this, it's actually doing the shoulder carry. It's somewhat awkward. I'm going to switch over to the right shoulder so I don't take out an exit sign. It's actually somewhat awkward. Ow! Shins. Even if it's not, even if it's just a fiberglass shell and plastic shell that doesn't weigh anything, it's just very bulky. So I've actually switched from the shoulder carry position to a kind of crooked arm position. It's now sitting level with my shoulder because I'm picking up far too many injuries far too quickly to keep going with that wretched shoulder carry. To be fair, in the film, I think those veterans were probably a bit shorter than me, so from that sense at least they might have gotten away with it somewhat more easily. Ow. And through, you get a sense for just how big these things are. All right, and back through here, and finally, good job, shell. Back in position. So yeah, with a few caveats and a lot of motorized assistance, it is in fact possible to move shells from turret 3 to turret 2, or indeed, I suppose, carry on to turret 1 in an hourglass battleship. But the two big caveats is, one, you better hope that as a museum ship, someone's cut a lovely great big hole in the side of the turret and barbette system at deck level 3, and two, you ain't carrying it by hand. Right, onwards and upwards. Right, so here we are in Broadway, deck level 3. As you can see, we are at number 2 fire room, boiler number 4, and we're going to pop inside and have a look at one of the 3 things we're investigating about the movie Battleship. Could you get the ship moving as quickly as they show in the movie? Well, to do that, we need to get down to the boilers. I mean, technically, we're already at the boilers. We're just at a somewhat taller portion of it. Here we go. Right. I mean, as you can see, there is more boiler to go, but this is the bit we really need to be looking at. This is where you light off the boilers. Now, there are some caveats in the film. They have a slightly ahistorical perspective of, they say that Missouri is about to be sent out for a test drive. Obviously, in reality, the US Navy and the museum ships do not test drive their Iowa-class battleships at all, let alone regularly. But that's a conceit for the film. She has some fuel in her tanks, etc., and they're prepping her to go. Fine. So, within the confines of the rules set within the film, it should be theoretically possible for her to get going. But how easy is that going to be? Well, these are our light-off points for part of the boiler. And what you need to light the boiler off are these things. These are the burner rods. And what you would have here is the light-off torch. Here it is. So, as you can see, you'd have fuel down in here. Dunk it in the fuel. Bring it up. Someone would light it off. Give it a bit of a twirl so that it's fully burning. And then, I'm just going to put this down because obviously we're not actually lighting off the boiler. Stay. And then you would open up one of these. This one seems loose enough. There we go. And in here, I'm going to try and get a light on here, and if not, I will take a photo. There we go. Right. So, switching camera. Right, so, oh, wrong way. Right, so if we actually do light off, right, so if we actually do want to light off our boiler, you can see we would be opening this. That opens that, and beyond there is going to be the fuel sprayer. So we would stick our ignited lighter into there, has to go through there, and the fuel would hopefully catch. So let's close that up, back to condition. Right, so you might think, okay, well we've lit something, that's good. Well, here's our valve, because we've got our fuel line coming up here. But it's not quite that simple, because you've got your fuel burner here. So let's try and get that out. There we go. Let's put that in a little bit so it doesn't fall into some inconvenient space where we can't get it back. There we go. Right, so, excuse me, thank you. Here is our fuel burner. Now, as you can see, this gets pulled out and put back in, like so. And then you have to secure it. So what does that look like? Well, that looks like this. You can see it's a nice long thing. Bring it off the bench. And at this end, oh good, someone's left this nice and loose. At this end, there is your fuel nozzle. So you'd actually have a specific burner head, which you'd pop in there. Different sizes and levels of spray, depending on if you're lighting off the fires or you want high pressure steam. Well, you want high pressure steam anyway if you want to go full speed. So you fit the appropriate head there. There's a filter in there. And then I'm just going to pop that back on display. You would take those, put them in here. And as you can see, there's a whole array of them because, as I said, you'll be using different burner head levels for different things. So if you're lighting off, you want one set. If you're then proceeding at speed, you want another set. And it's much easier to have a bunch ready to go with a different setting and then just pull this one out, put the new one in. You see there's some more over there. Then it would be to take this out, wait for it to cool down, put the new head in. Obviously at that point there's nothing going on in this burner, which isn't good. And you switch them around. Now, what's the purpose of all this? Well, as we see in the movie, they conduct the light-off procedure as we've just kind of demonstrated. The problem is if they're doing that, that means this thing is either cold, or if we're very generous and we say, okay, yeah, they said they were about to do a test run, maybe they've warmed the boiler up. But fundamentally, that doesn't help matters too much, because all that changes is that if you're lighting the boiler from cold, Missouri would still be sitting in Pearl Harbor after the Earth had been completely conquered. It takes quite a while to warm up this amount of water, well, and the rest of the machinery for that matter. If we accept that perhaps she'd been warming up beforehand, so they maybe warmed the boilers up, got some steam circulating, got a bit of pressure up, then killed the boilers, which we know the boilers were not lit because we see them lighting them, then it could shorten the amount of time that she needs to have steam built up. But since we see people go down into the engine room and it is secure and it's not in any way, shape or form, you know, live, ready to go, people monitoring stuff, then at the very least, I would reckon they'd maybe lit the boilers off and then shut them down the night before. So you'd still be talking about several hours to bring the ship up to speed. And of course, if you want her to go as fast as possible, which is what they do in the movie, it's not just this set of burners, it's all the burners in this boiler room and in the other 3 boiler rooms. That's going to need quite a lot of people, because even if you're doing it with a couple of guys, well, you've got 5 to monitor here, 5 to light off and monitor. Then you've got, come across, another set over there. And, well, then you've got the rest of the boiler room to monitor. You've got condensers, you've got outlets. You can see we've got the main steam diagram. There's a lot of stuff to monitor. So, yeah, they weren't going to get Missouri ready to go in anything close to the time that the movie shows. About the only way that that would be possible would be if, for sake of argument, they'd actually had the ship primed and ready to go, all steam pressure up, etc., etc., but then perhaps been called away by the alerts that kicked off the movie when the aliens land. And then if the boilers had not been lit for half an hour, few hours at most, maybe, just maybe, they could get everything going. But well, anyone who's worked with any kind of high pressure boilers, let alone big 600 psi boilers like this, will tell you that if you have this thing fully up to pressure or close to it, the very last thing you're going to do is just cut the boiler fires and go, okay, job done, and walk off. Because that's not the kind of pressurized steam system you want to just leave lying around overnight. So, could Missouri have got going? Eventually, yes. In the time period granted to her in the movie, no. So, where are we now? Well, as you might guess, we're in something of an echoey chamber, but, as they say, let there be light. Yep, we're down in the chain locker. This is one of the areas where, unsurprisingly, chain is kept for the anchors, because, you know, when you haul in those long anchor chains that keep the ship in place when it's stationary, well, it's got to go somewhere through there, don't know if you can see particularly, but through these D handholds, there's another set of chain for another anchor line. Now, look up there, you can see that is where the chain is going up onto the deck. In this area, you can see all the dents and the scuff marks all around us where big heavy length of chains have just bashed into things. But we're of course down here to examine, would it be possible for that wonderful handbrake turn in the Missouri to actually take place? Sadly, despite how awesome a scene it is, I'm afraid I have to tell you that that's not possible. Now, of course, there are lots of arguments that have gone back and forth online about why it's not possible. The fairly sensible ones have included things like the fact that the anchor probably wouldn't ground. If it did, one of these chain links would snap because they're not designed to stop a 45,000+ ton battleship moving at 33 knots. Or perhaps more prosaically, that even if the chain held, at least for a time, it would just go through the side of the ship like cheese wire because the bow is not armoured and it's not even particularly heavily built by the standards of the rest of the unarmoured portion of the ship. But all of that aside, even if we assumed that the hawse area through which the anchor chain passes is arbitrarily strong, and even if we assume that the anchor chain is arbitrarily strong, and if we assume that it found something on the seabed that is arbitrarily strong, there is one other problem which has been staring us right in the face, and that is this red section of chain, which as you can see hangs down there, goes off into the depths of the pile of chain. And you'll notice there right at the top, there's a D-ring that's bolted into a little mounting which is attached to this bulkhead. And you might guess already from the fact that the bulkhead, like all the others, is quite dented, it's not exactly thick, you know. This is not armour, this is just standard bulkhead material, and that is just welded onto it. So even if every other part of the ship was arbitrarily strong, when you get to a point where you run out of anchor chain, which is when the ship gets yanked, that is all that is going to be supporting the ship from keeping it attached to the rest of the anchor line. And that ain't stopping the ship. That's just going to rip straight out. And then the line will go up there and disappear off into the deep blue sea. So, as I said, awesome a scene as it is, unfortunately, it's also possibly the least realistic of the three that we've looked at. Because as we've established, as I work my way back across this dusty pile of anchor, as we've already established, lighting off the boilers, technically possible, just not at the speed shown in the movie. Manoeuvring a shell from turret 3 to the forward turrets, definitely possible, and actually possible in a reasonable amount of time, just not in the exact way that they show it being done. But this, there's no way that this is going to work. And now I have to get all the way up there without this light, which I can't find the button for. There it is. See you later.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.